This video is called How to Manufacture a Mexican Cumorah. Now you might start off by wondering, why would anyone want to manufacture a Mexican Cumorah? I'll show you here. We know Cumorah was in New York, according to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, as we've discussed before. But then there was some indication in the Times and Seasons in 1842 that Zarahemla was actually down here in Guatemala. The distance between these is pretty far. It's 3,400 miles. So it's difficult to explain how the Nephites could have covered this distance, which leads to the question of which one of these are we going to keep? Well, the scholars recognize we can't have both. We're going to have to get rid of the one in Cumorah because they decided the one in Zarahemla was more believable or fit the text, or they liked it better, whatever. So we have to cross off the one in New York, but that raises the problem of what Joseph and Oliver said. So instead they decided to make the one in New York the product of a false tradition started by unknown early members of the church, and it's really only the place where Moroni buried the plates, but according to the scholars, Moroni never named the hill. This is called the Two Cumorahs theory. The real Cumorah, according to the scholars, is down here in southern Mexico somewhere, and this is the one where Mormon buried the plates, according to Mormon 6:6. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you're familiar with what Joseph Fielding Smith said about it. He said this theory is false. He talks about this new theory that the Lamanites and Nephites were confined almost entirely within the borders of the territory comprising Central America, a southern portion of Mexico, which is what the most BYU and CES scholars say today, or they have been teaching anyway. Now look at this. He pointed out that this modernistic theory of necessity to be consistent must place the waters of Ripley Ancum and the Hill Cumorah someplace within the restricted territory of Central America, notwithstanding the teachings of the church to the contrary for upwards of 100 years. Now maybe this is just an academic exercise, doesn't really matter, but look at what the warning that he gave. Because of this theory, he said, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. And that's exactly what I think has happened and is happening, and that's why I want to address this today for a minute. Let's take a look at the reference here. This is Book of Mormon Resources up here, the name of the blog. It's a really good blog for, in a lot of ways, for the analysis of the Book of Mormon, but this particular one talks about the Hill Cumorah exactly in the same terms that President Smith warned us about. Look at this. It says, on a certain hill, probably somewhere in Veracruz, Mexico. That means southern Mexico, just like President Smith talked about. It says, two nations met their demise through a large-scale warfare. The Jaredites self-destructed, the Nephites were annihilated. It gives the explanation of Cumorah, but I just can't emphasize this enough. He's saying that this all took place somewhere in Veracruz, Mexico. So this is the exact, the quote-unquote real Cumorah, as opposed to the false tradition one in New York that we're referring to here. How does he rationalize this? Let's just go through some of the examples here. This is kind of cool. Take the first paragraph. Ramah or Cumorah is geographically associated with the hill Shem, okay, and the extensive waters of Ripley Ancum is also described as a place where the Nephites were destroyed. Cumorah was a land as well as a hill. That's all fine. Now look here. It says Limhi's exploring party. If you remember these incidents in the Book of Mormon, Limhi sent some people to find Zarahemla, and they ended up finding the Jaredites. But it says here that they visited the land of Cumorah. The text doesn't say that. It just says that they visited a place where the previous civilization had been destroyed. We don't know if it was Cumorah or not. He's just assuming that here. Okay, I'm going to skip down. You can go through this and analyze it if you want. This is an interesting one. A hill is something we may reasonably expect to find on a modern map. Well, that may or may not be the case. There's millions of hills in the world. So let's see how he explains why it's in exactly where Joseph Fielding Smith said it was not. He says the text gives us enough information about Ramah Cumorah to enable intelligent searching. These hills in Oaxaca and Veracruz have been seriously studied and proposed as candidates. Here's some of the hills that these Mesoamerican scholars have looked at. Maybe that's a bad color to show you. It's a different color here. But the point is that there's several hills here. This is the Gulf Coast of Central America. These different hills have been studied by these scholars in complete defiance of what Joseph Fielding Smith taught us. But they pursue it anyway. Now, this is awesome. And remember, this is in October, so this blog is in October, so right now it's November, so these guys are still down here. We've got Warren Aston down there doing an expedition, a 3-man team, exploring each of these hills to see if they meet the text. Now this is what you're going to like. It says, my proposed criteria are itemized 1 through 30 below. So each time you see one of these little blue numbers, that's the criteria that supposedly come from the text. I'm not going to take the time to go through all 30 of them, but I thought you'd like to see some of them here. Hill Cumorah is a hill, not a mountain. We can agree with that. In the text, mountains and hills are of the same genre. Well, I suppose, a mountain and a hill is probably the same genre. And I pulled it up here so we can take a look at Helaman 12:9. Yea, behold, at his voice do the hills and the mountains tremble and quake. Okay, I guess that means it's the same genre. 3 Nephi 4:1. Came fast the latter end. The robbers, these are the Gadianton robbers, began to come down and sally forth from the hills and out of mountains and the wilderness and their strongholds and their secret places. So, if the hills and the mountains are the same genre, does that mean the wilderness, the strongholds, the secret places are all the same genre? Just kind of a rhetorical question. The mountains are more massive. 4 Nephi 4:25 and 2 Nephi 12. Let's look at that. I'm sorry, 2 Nephi 4:25. Let's look at that one. 2 Nephi 4:25, right here, says, the wings of his spirit hath my body been carried away upon exceedingly high mountains. This is Nephi appearing his vision of the future world and the promised land. He had compared it to being on an exceedingly high mountain. We would probably compare it more to being on like a high airplane, but the point is that it was an exceedingly high mountain that Nephi was referring to. And then the other is 2 Nephi 12, 2 through 2 and 4. Here's 2 Nephi 12. It shall come to pass in the last days when the mountains of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, it shall be exalted above the hills, all nations shall flow unto it. Of course, that's generally been interpreted as the Salt Lake City area, neither in Central America nor in New York, but okay, we can agree with this. Mountains are more massive than hills. Book of Mormon only once used as an adjective to modify hill, in that sense is diminutive. Let's see that one, 2 Nephi 15:1. Now this is a quotation from Isaiah. It really has nothing to do with Book of Mormon geography, but my well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill. I'm not sure why that's diminutive, but we can go with that. Now this is interesting. Mountains, on the other hand, look at this. Mountains, on the other hand, are frequently modified with adjectives emphasizing their grandeur. Now, frequently here really means twice in the entire Book of Mormon. Let's look at what Helaman 14 says. Helaman 14. Behold, there shall be great tempests, and there shall be many mountains laid low, like unto a valley, and there shall be many places which are now called valleys, which shall become mountains, whose height is great. So we can say that there would be mountains whose height is great. That's not too bad to say that's grandeur. 3 Nephi 8:10. 3 Nephi 8:10. And the earth was carried up upon the city of Moronihah, that in the place of the city there became a great mountain. Now this one is interesting because the first one we just looked at was Samuel Lamanite's prophecies of what would happen. This is the only indication of the fulfillment of those prophecies in the area where Christ visited the Nephites. And look what it says. It says, the earth was carried up upon the city of Moronihah. It was a dirt being pushed up on top of the city like this. It wasn't something that came up from the bottom. That in the place of the city there became a great mountain. So there was a great mountain, not necessarily a high mountain, just a great mountain. But it wasn't formed the way Samuel the Lamanite described a valley becoming a mountain, which suggests to us that the prophecies of Samuel the Lamanite were not fulfilled in the areas that Christ visited, at least in the account that we have in the Book of Mormon, which is an interesting topic. Here's another one. The word mountain itself is even used as an adjective implying a large size. In both of these cases, it's talking about right here, I'll show you, it's talking about the mountain waves right there. So it is an adjective, but it doesn't really have anything to do with mountains. It just means a large wave. And then it says, on the small end of the scale, a hill can be man-made, 2 Nephi 17, 25. Here's what that one reads. You can see it here. In all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither for the fear of briars and thorns. I'm not sure how that talks about being a man-made hill, but let's say it does. It's not that significant. Point is, we've gone through all these scriptures now, and look at this conclusion. This is amazing. So Ramah has larger and higher mountains in its environment. Now think about that for a minute. None of the scriptures that we just looked at say that at all. They just refer to the existence of some mountains in Helaman, and the one in 4th Nephi where the city was buried by dirt and became a great mountain. But this is just purely a hypothetical guess. Nothing in the scriptures say there are other larger and higher mountains anywhere near Hill Cumorah. There were some mountains somewhere, and there was a few mountains somewhere in the land that the Nephites occupied, but there's no indication they had any proximity to Ramah or Cumorah. So the number one is just an inference, a guess. Here's another one. I won't go through all these scriptures, you can do it yourself, but it says, this means Ramah Cumorah is self-contained rather than part of an extended mountain range. It doesn't really mean that, it's a possibility. Ramah Cumorah is in the Nephite land northward. We can live with that. This places it, look at this. This places it in a location prone to seismic and volcanic activity. We've seen before this whole volcanic activity thing is bogus. Anyone who's read the Book of Mormon knows that it never mentions volcanoes. And we've had plenty of other explanations for that in North America. But they keep talking about a volcanic activity because they have to, because they're proposing that the Book of Mormon took place in Central America, which has lots of volcanoes. Here's another one that's pretty fun. It says Ramah Cumorah, right here. Ramah Cumorah is in a land with high average annual rainfall. Mormon 6:4. So let's go to that one. I think I put that up here. Maybe I didn't. Mormon 6:4. Now here's how we come up with the average rainfall. Check this out. It came to pass that we did march forth to the land of Cumorah. We did pitch our tents around the hill Cumorah, and it was in a land of many waters, rivers, and fountains. And here we had hoped to gain advantage over the Lamanites. Didn't even mention rain. Now, obviously, water has to come from somewhere, but when it flows from another place, you can have waters, rivers, and fountains with underground steam and surface water flowing from somewhere else. It says nothing about high average annual rainfall. But that has to be, again, this is an example of how they're trying to fit this into Central America, so they have to say that, even though the text doesn't say it. There are so many well-watered areas in southern Mexico that in order for waters, rivers, and fountains to be useful differentiators, Ramah Cumorah must be near more arid territory. Again, that's just completely made up criteria for Cumorah. Ramah Cumorah was in a land that afforded the Nephites a potential advantage over their enemies. Well, let's go with it just for now. That advantage is probably due to crop yields or access to other food resources such as fish. Well, given the references to waters and rivers, fish makes sense. But they never talk about growing crops here, anywhere in the text. He just makes that up here. It may also have come from a tactically favorable terrain or access to materials for armament fabrication. Again, it's just, it may also, but it may not have. Advantage probably did not come from man-made fortifications, which are not mentioned again in the text after the city desolation was abandoned. Now think about that for a minute. This is the exact location where the Jaredites had their final battles. Do you think the Jaredites might have had man-made fortifications that the Nephites used? That seems a far more likely probability than assuming that they had crops. They were growing crops here around Cumorah. Let's see. Eastward from Ramah is a seacoast. Ether 9:3. Let's look at that one. Ether 9, verse 3. This is pretty important. It says, "The Lord warned Omer in a dream that he should depart out of the land. Wherefore Omer departed out of the land with his family, traveled many days, and came over and passed by the hill of Shem, and came over by the place where the Nephites were destroyed, and from thence eastward, and came to a place which was called Absalom by the seashore." This is what this criteria is referring to. Now, go back here. Sea coast, not seashore, eastward from Ramah. How far eastward? We don't know. He says from the hill to the sea, one does not cross over any significant natural barriers, such as a mountain or river. That's pretty difficult to take from that text. The text doesn't say anything like that. But it's the kind of inference these guys have to make. This implies proximity to the sea. So you take, this is a series of cascading assumptions that are circular reasoning in order to justify the Mesoamerican setting. You can see that here. But I want to show you something else over here, if I can find it real quick, because when we're talking about Cumorah, here's a map of Cumorah. When you look at a map of New York, it's usually kind of easy to find Cumorah, because if you take this lake here and go straight up, Cumorah is always right about in that area. So if you were to go east from here, are there any lakes or any seas you may stop at? There's one here, there's one here, there's one here, and of course you could go east and go up here. All four of these have more surface area than the Sea of Galilee, which is, I think everyone will agree that in Hebrew the Sea of Galilee is a sea. So any of these would qualify as a sea, and they're within short distance of the Hill Cumorah. Okay, going back now to the blog post. Northward from Cumorah is a relatively large body of water the Nephites called Ripnancum. Let's go back to this map. Northward of Cumorah, again, just as a reminder, here's Cumorah. Northward, what do you have? Pretty large sea. It's the Lake Ontario. So that seems to fit. You don't recognize it here, but that seems to fit. Ramah Cumorah is large enough that 230,000 people could encamp around it for a period of up to 4 years. I'm not going to take this. Well, let's go ahead and look at it. Mormon 6:4 again. We looked at this a minute ago, and I don't know where it says they were camping around Cumorah for 4 years with 240,000 people in that verse. And this is another series of cascading inferences. And I'll show you why here. Let's see what he says. Allowing 25 square meters of space per person, that means a refugee camp with an area of 575 hectares. Now, I'm just going to show you something, going with what he says here, which I'm going to show you why I disagree with in a minute. Here is a map showing the Hill Cumorah. And here is 2 miles, which is roughly the length of the Hill Cumorah. Oliver Cowdery said the final battles took place from the top of the Hill Cumorah to over here, a mile over in this direction. I'm going to show you that distance here. It's a mile to that side, which is, if I click on this, measure distance to here, that's about a mile, right? There's a mile. So if you go a mile here 2 miles down in this valley that Oliver Cowdery specifically identified. The total of that area is right about 500 and, let's see exactly, it's around 520 or so hectares, which is pretty close. It says Nephites camped around the hill. I was only referring to the ones on the west side. The phrase roundabout implies circularity. Well, it implies circularity in the sense that it's an object you can be around, but you can go roundabout a square or even an oblong feature. The hill likely has a roughly circular shape. That's just completely imaginary. The fact that people were living in tents at year-end in Mormon 6:5 implies a mild climate. That's imaginary as well. It's pretty obvious, I think, to you that people live in tents all year round, as they have, especially when it's an army under siege and they're moving quickly. This talks Riplah must have been a massive... I'm going to skip over this because it's just more imaginary stuff. Now, the doomed Nephites had a clear view of approaching Lamanite armies in 6-7. Those of you who have been to Cumorah know you can see Rochester, which is 20 miles away. You can see quite a long distance from the top of Cumorah. But he says here, this means Ramah, look at this, this means Ramah, Cumorah is surrounded by plains. Well, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that people could see long enough distance to see the Lamanite armies approaching, but it doesn't mean it was surrounded by plains. The hill and surrounding plains are compact enough that the Lamanites could leave camp, travel to the Duggan Nephites, slaughter 230,000 people, and return to their camps within a single 24-hour period. Now this one, you just have to say, come on. Look at what it says in here in verse 11. Okay. Mormon is talking here about his, it came to pass that my men were hewn down, even my 10,000 who were with me. So there were 10,000 who fell in this battle. And when they had gone through and hewn down all my people, save 24 of us, among whom was my son Moroni, they survived until the next day. And the Lamanites had returned unto their camps. So here's a key point here I want to show you. When the Lamanites returned to the camp, they behold, it says we, meaning the 24 of them, Mormon, Moroni, and 22 others, did behold on the next day, from the top of the Hill Cumorah, the 10,000 of my people who were hewn down. So they beheld 10,000 of his people who had been killed. We also beheld the 10,000 of my people who were led by my son Moroni. That's it. That's 20,000 people. It's the only ones they saw that day. Now, come down here to the next few verses. Behold, the 10,000 of Gidonahah had fallen, Lama had fallen, Gilgal had fallen, Limhah had fallen, and so on. This is where they come up with the 200 and, what does he say here? 230,000 people. The text does not say they were all killed on the same day. The only ones you could see from the top of the Hill Cumorah were the ones that were led by Mormon and Moroni. The rest of these men had all died during the battle. So, all these people, except for the 24, have been killed during the battle. Not this one day. I mean, realistically, this is the kind of thing that raises questions among skeptics. When someone says that 230,000 people on one side were killed in 24 hours. It's just not realistic, and it's not what the text says anyway. Plus you would have Lamanite casualties on top of that. Let's see. So this is why he comes up with this idea. Ramah Cumorah was high enough and symmetrical enough. See, this is where they get into all these kind of funny requirements. Ramah Cumorah was high enough and symmetrical enough. From the summit, Mormon and Moroni could view nearly 250,000 corpses. I just showed you the text says nothing like that. So, Ramah Cumorah was a significant landmark known to both the Nephites and Lamanites. It was a landmark. Significant is not necessarily so significant. The text doesn't say it was significant. It was known to him, though. Shem is a second hill. Some natural barrier separated the two. That's reasonable. Nephites in their final decades retreated northward, and so on. Here's a funny one. He says here, why did the survivors not flee northward? I'll point it out here. Why did they not migrate northward? Now, on their models in Central America, I didn't take the time to show you, but there's a landmass to the north. So they could have escaped northward, which they realized the weakness of their position. So he says here, some force northward was so powerful that the refugees preferred to flee southward and take their chances rather than this. So this imaginary force northward supposedly is the reason that the Nephites and Lamanites did not flee to the north. Well, a minute ago, we looked at the relief map of the area. If you're right here at Cumorah, are you going to be able to retreat northward? Not when there's a massive lake up there, of course not. But they don't want to say that in their Mesoamerican geography because it doesn't fit. So that, in other words, the text doesn't fit their geography. So instead they make up this idea of a massive army to the north that the text never mentions, because they don't want to deal with the fact that there's this huge lake. Look how big this lake is. There's no way they could have fled to the north. Not to mention the geology here. The lake used to be much bigger. It used to extend, you can still see it on the road here, it used to extend about like this, and it actually connected down to these lakes. So it makes sense that Cumorah was right here. But that's a topic for another day. All right. Let's go back to this. We have the powerful force. Here he gets into the Limhi stuff again, which is, we need a separate discussion of this. I have it in the Moroni's America book. But they come down here to say, here's some of the fun requirements that they've got. According to them, because Limhi's people got lost, even though they got lost, they knew it should be in the same general direction from Nephi as Zarahemla. Seems to me if it was in the same general direction, they wouldn't have got lost. Its air distance from Nephi should be 0.5 and 2, between 0.5 and 2 times the Nephi Zarahemla distance. That's just completely made up. Nothing in the text to support that. Its elevation should be roughly similar to Zarahemla's. Again, just made up. Should be west of a large north-flowing river. Now this one, of course, is their north-flowing river, which the text never says. It's concocted to fit Mesoamerica, but it doesn't really work in the text. Although, ironically, in North America, it is kind of a northeastern flowing river. Should be in a similar location as Zarahemla relative to mountains, fall line, coastal plain, and the sea. Well, if it was this similar, how would they have gotten lost? It just doesn't make sense. Here's a fun one. Climate is the most likely reason Xenophili made the irrational decision to return, I covered that up, to return to Nephi shortly after escaping to Zarahemla. Look at that. So now all of a sudden its climate is the reason Xenoph went up there, even though he never mentions that in the book. Wouldn't it be more likely that he wanted to return to the land of his fathers, whether for nostalgia or for the perception that there were more metals there, maybe? There was more minerals to work with, something like that. People tend to like to go back to the land of their ancestors anyway. But based on that, he expects that the Cumorah area and the Zarahemla area have similar climates that are both very different from Nephi's. And then the next one down here is the viable camp for the land of Morah must be many days' travel from Ramah, Cumorah. I won't go through that. Well, after considering these 30 proposed criteria, he wants to say that it's this 1,800 meter mountain in southern Veracruz. I just encourage you to read through this and see to what extent they go to explicitly contradict what Joseph Fielding Smith told us about this. Out of these 30 criteria, maybe 5 or 6 are directly required by the text. The rest of them are all a product of circular reasoning, because they went down here, they knew it had to be somewhere here. This is a map that shows you. See why, if you were anywhere along here, any of these, they could have retreated northward no problem. So they had to imagine that there's this big army up here or something that the text never talks about blocking their escape. Whereas when you look at New York, where Joseph said it was, you have Lake Ontario right there blocking their escape. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at here is to show you and encourage you to take a look at this on your own, to see how they are able to kind of make up their own Cumorah here down in southern Mexico. That's why I call this whole thing the how to manufacture a Mexican Cumorah right here. You just go through the text and make up requirements that happen to fit, and you're good to go. So, by the way, I love these guys. This is not a personal thing. I just think people should see the extent that they go to show that they disagree with the prophets on this. All right, thanks.